how do you adapt 3 detailed chapters which wrap up the feelings and emotions of an entire epic saga and compress them into only 5 simple words? Well, there's one group of people who might know the answer to that, and that would be Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh, and Philippa Boyens, who spearheaded writing the film adaptations of The Lord of the Rings. You see, after Sam and Frodo are rescued from Mount Doom in the book, Tolkien spends 3 beautifully crafted chapters detailing their time in Gondor as they recover, the true love story of Faramir and Éowyn, and the parting of the Fellowship as they journey from Minas Tirith to Rivendell. If you listen to the audiobooks, this takes about 3 hours to get through and contains some of the greatest writing Tolkien has ever done. But the movie? Well, they threw that out the window and showcased the pure emotion of these moments in one line that makes almost every Lord of the Rings fan tear up as they watch it. So join me as in today's video we journey through some of the final pages of Tolkien's story and uncover each key moment from these chapters that never made it on screen. My name is Gibby and welcome to episode 46 of Movies vs. Manuscripts, Lord of the Rings edition. This is the show in which I analyze the Lord of the Rings movies versus the books and find all the differences along the way. This week is a little bit different because we have come upon some of the most overlooked and condensed parts of Tolkien's work, which are the concluding chapters of the whole story. So while I still will be addressing the changes, there really aren't many scenes that correspond to these chapters, which means that most of what we cover today will be omissions and removals. But first, I wanted to give a shout out to this commenter from a past episode. Be sure to drop your thoughts below to potentially be featured next. And as always, I want to give a huge thank you to my loyal Patreon supporters who make videos like this possible each week. To gain behind the scenes access and watch every video before it's published on YouTube, join the community today. Per usual, I'll cover all the changes across the 4 major categories of characters, timeline, location, and plot. But first, let's recap the small portion of these chapters that Peter Jackson did actually adapt. That way, it's fresh on our mind for the analysis. Picking up from where we left off last week with Sam and Frodo being rescued, we see Frodo waking up alone in bed with Gandalf standing there over him. Frodo is happy to see his old friend, and they both begin to laugh. And as they do, each member of the Fellowship walks in and reunites with their beloved Frodo. The last person to enter is Sam, who shares a knowing look with his master, and then we fade to a later time when Aragorn is being crowned the King of Gondor. Aragorn gives a speech and then sings a song, and we see him walking through his people and greeting the main characters that we've gotten to know in the movies, like Éowyn and Faramir, Éomer, Legolas, and Gimli, and then finally, Aragorn sees Arwen from behind a banner, and he goes up to her. They then share a kiss and everyone rejoices, and then Arwen and Aragorn walk up to the 4 hobbits who are the last to be greeted. The hobbits go to bow, but Aragorn stops them and says the simple yet impactful words, "My friends, you bow to no one." And on that touching note, our scenes end for this week. So first, let's take a peek at character, timeline, and location differences before we jump into the plot and reveal everything you missed from these 3 chapters in the book. And if you've grown accustomed to these first 3 categories being short and sweet, then today will be a good wake-up call for you because oh boy, we've got a lot to cover. Let's start with characters. To help simplify this, let's first take a look at who we see in the movie. Obviously, we have our 4 hobbits, Gandalf, Gimli, Legolas, Elrond, Éomer, Éowyn and Faramir, Arwen, and of course, Aragorn. So 13 people total. Well, the book is quite different, as there are 57 unique characters that are included or at least mentioned by name in these chapters. This is not typical of Tolkien, but since these chapters are sort of wrapping up the entire story, it is expected that there's going to be a lot of characters, and our location category is quite similar. So because you probably don't want me to spend an hour reading off every name and explaining who they are, I have just written down all 57 names here based on whether they were directly involved or just mentioned. So you can pause the video now if you want to take a look over that in more detail. As for timeline, things are obviously very messed up in the movie. Now just to clarify, technically all of these timeline issues could be solved with Peter Jackson just saying, just because we didn't show it doesn't mean it didn't happen. But I still feel like I should mention them because we do get several months condensed into just a couple of minutes. First of all, we learn that Frodo and Sam were asleep for 14 days after being rescued from the slopes of Mount Doom. Second, Aragorn's coronation isn't until about 3 weeks after Frodo and Sam wake up. Third, all of our main characters stay in Minas Tirith for months because Aragorn wants them all to be around for his wedding. We'll talk about this more in the plot changes, but yes, there's a wedding. To be specific, Frodo is in the city from May 1st until July 22nd. And lastly, the Hobbit's journey home takes a while as well. Remember, these locations aren't just a simple ride away. They take weeks to travel back and forth between locations, especially if you're making pit stops, which they did. And speaking of those pit stops, that brings us to our location category. As similarly to the characters, there's a lot missing. First, there's a direct change, as in the book, Sam and Frodo wake up in Ithilien, not Minas Tirith. In the movie, the only place we see is Minas Tirith, but once again, because the book is wrapping things up and there's a whole journey home, we see a lot more than just the White City. To be specific, there are 41 locations mentioned or directly involved in these chapters. Once again, I have written them out below based on their involvement in the story, so you can pause and read up on them if you'd like. As always, before I jump into the plot changes, I just want to remind you that you can use the Audible link in the description to claim your free trial, which comes with one free book of your choice, and each free trial supports the channel and these videos. If you're just now finding my channel through this video, there's hours and hours of content that you can go back and binge, so maybe grab the Lord of the Rings on Audible and follow along with the videos using the playlist in the description. Anyway, that being said, let's dive into these amazing chapters and reveal exactly what you missed if you've only watched the movies. Or if you've read the books, this will be a great way to relive these moments. Since things are a bit weird today, here's how we're going to do things. I will cover each chapter one by one, and if it corresponds to a scene, then I'll point out the changes first. After I've covered the brief scene changes, I will dive into the massive omissions and incredible storytelling that we miss in the book. So to kick things off, we are of course going to begin with Chapter 4, The Field of Cormallen. However, we are jumping into it a few pages in, because the start of the chapter actually covers the ending of the Battle of the Morannon and the rescue of Sam and Frodo. So jumping ahead to when the hobbits wake up, we have our first of only 2 changes that directly relate to this scene, which is that Frodo isn't the one who wakes up. Sam is. Yep, they are not in a room, but rather on a soft bed laying under a tree in Ithilien, which Sam immediately recognizes and thinks that he has just woken up from a long slumber, not remembering the events of Mount Doom as being real. Then as he looks to his side and sees Frodo sleeping next to him and his 4-fingered hand, Sam remembers what happened and comes to his senses. But before he can freak out fully, Gandalf speaks to him and Sam looks at the White Wizard amazed at his old friend who is now back from the dead. Now before I continue on with what happens next during the remainder of the chapter, I just have to mention the second direct change made in this scene, which is the reunion of the Fellowship. As we unpack this chapter, we'll slowly see how Frodo and Sam got reunited with their friends, but in order to save time in the movie, they just had everyone walk into the room and say hey to Frodo one by one. This is not how it happens in the book. So how does it happen? Well, let's put the scene away for now and open up our notepad to jot down the actual order of events. So to go back to Sam realizing Gandalf is there next to him, the next thing we read is Frodo waking up and Gandalf handing back some of their belongings. The wizard gives Frodo the Phial of Galadriel and Sam his box of soil, both of their gifts from the lady. And finally, he gives them their old orc garb which they used to get through Mordor. The hobbits are confused by this, but Gandalf tells them that the king is waiting for them, and although they will get fitting clothes for the future, nothing will give them more honor than wearing the clothes they wore when defeating the Dark Lord. We then continue on to read some of the most beautiful writing in Tolkien's works, as he describes the stunning landscape and the celebration set before them. Sam and Frodo have a light meal, put on their old clothes, and then walk to the Field of Cormallen where a great host is waiting for them. As the hobbits walk up, the warriors unsheath their swords, trumpets sound, and all the people speak in their own tongues, saying praise them with great praise, and other things like that, as Sam and Frodo walk through to the king. As they get to the throne, which has 2 seats next to it, the king rose and Sam soon enough recognized him as Strider, and Aragorn lovingly greeted his old friends, taking them to the throne and setting them upon it. And then he looked out at the host and said, praise them with great praise. Then a minstrel knelt before them and begged leave to sing to them of Frodo of the 9 Fingers and the Ring of Doom. And for a while they listened as he sang to them, ending it with another, praise them with great praise. It was then after this that Aragorn led them to a pavilion where food had been prepared. But before eating, they were led away to change into clean linen, and Gandalf gave Frodo Sting and his mithril shirt, and Sam his elven cloak and short sword. Frodo says he does not wish for a sword, and tries to give Sting to Sam again, but upon Gandalf and Sam's insistence, he takes Sting and wears it for the feast. So, clad in cleaner clothing and armor, they walked into the feast and sat in places of honor at the king's table, with Éomer, Imrahil, Legolas, and Gimli. Weirdly enough, there is no big reunion with Legolas and Gimli that we read about in this moment of them first seeing each other. That comes later after the feast, and first, Sam and Frodo have to meet Merry and Pippin again. Sam is shocked at how much they have grown, and he barely recognizes them because of their armor, Merry looking like a Knight of Rohan, and Pippin a Knight of Gondor. But we read that later that night, the hobbits and Gandalf and Legolas and Gimli all spoke together about everything that had happened after their fateful separation at Parthgalen. Eventually, these friends wrap up their conversation with Gandalf insisting that Frodo and Sam must get some more sleep as they are still weak. Gimli then chimed in and said that Frodo and Sam weren't the only ones near death, and we learn that Gimli rescued Pippin from underneath a troll's body as he recognized the bare foot of a hobbit and pulled him out. And lastly, Legolas says his piece, saying that he will find rest by walking amongst the trees, and then he walked off singing of the sea as he went. The chapter then ends with a short paragraph detailing how, as the first week of May approached, the captains made ready to sail down the Anduin to Osgiliath, from where they would then continue to Minas Tirith. Now technically, we can't dive into the coronation from the movie just yet, because the first half of the next chapter is all about Éowyn and Faramir and their true love story, which the movie removed. Although we see them together briefly in the movie, we get none of the details of their time. So here's what happens in the book. The start of the 5th chapter, titled The Steward and the King, picks up with Éowyn shortly after the captains of Gondor had set out to the Black Gate. She insists on being freed from her confinement in the Houses of Healing, but the warden told her that he could not allow that, as Aragorn had instructed she be kept from leaving until she was fully healed. And something I won't get into today, but I wanted to mention, is that her wound was deeper than a physical one, as it was more so a depression and a darkness of mind. And that is where Faramir comes into play. On that same day Éowyn asked to leave, the warden told her to speak with the steward, Faramir. But when she met him, he told her that he was not officially steward. Due to the circumstances of his father's death and sickness, the title was never officially passed to him. So he told her that just like her, he too was confined to these Houses of Healing. But he told her that it would ease his care if she would spend time with him during these days of waiting. After this first conversation between them, Faramir goes back to the warden and asks for all of the information he can provide about the Lady Éowyn. And eventually the warden says that the halfling in his care would know more. So Faramir sent for Merry, and the two of them spoke at length about Éowyn and Merry's time together. I won't get into all the details and dialogue now, but pretty much the climax of their story comes after an eagle delivers the news of Sauron's defeat. Aragorn sends for Merry, and Éomer sends for Éowyn to come to the field of Cormallen to celebrate. And Merry goes, but Éowyn does not. She seems to be very distressed, and the warden talks with Faramir about it, so Faramir goes to see her. We then learn that Éowyn doesn't want to go because of two reasons. One, she can't bear to see Aragorn, the man she loves, because she knows that they cannot be together. And two, she does not want to leave Faramir, who she has grown to love. But she thinks that Faramir only loves her because he has pity on her. Faramir responds to this by saying, "Were you sorrowless, without fear or any lack, were you the blissful Queen of Gondor, still I would love you." And at these words, Éowyn's heart softened, and she tells Faramir that she no longer wishes to take lives in battle or be a shield maiden of Rohan, or even a queen. Now she simply wishes to heal and help all that grows and create life. And this is pretty much her way of saying yes to Faramir's proposal. This section in the chapter isn't necessarily the most important, because Tolkien could have come up with a much more brief ending for Faramir and Éowyn's story. But I can't help but love these few pages of writing. It's like a brief Shakespearean romance inside of this ending to our epic tale. But I understand why it couldn't be included in the movie, as it just would have taken way too much time. Jackson did the best he could by showing Éowyn and Faramir watching Aragorn and the armies leave Gondor to go to the Black Gate, and then showing them again at Aragorn's coronation. And speaking of which, that brings us to the next half of this chapter, in which Aragorn and the rest of the company arrive back at Minas Tirith, and Aragorn's coronation happens immediately. So bringing back up the scene from the movie, here are the immediate changes. First, this coronation actually happens in the fields of the Pelennor, where the people had set up tents and pavilions to await the return of the king. Second, Frodo is actually the one who presents the crown, not Gimli. Third, Aragorn doesn't go around meeting people, and he doesn't see Arwen. That happens much later, as we'll find out in a moment. And finally, the fourth change is that Aragorn doesn't say, "You bow to no one." We'll talk about this more at the end, but this epic moment never happens in the book. The closest thing we get is the celebration in Ithilien that we discussed earlier. But now, putting away the movie scene, how does this event really take place in the book? Well, for starters, the actual coronation ceremony is quite different. First, Faramir greets Aragorn as he arrives and hands over his white rod, which was the sign of the steward. He offers his resignation as steward, but Aragorn takes the rod and then hands it back. saying that as long as Aragorn's line prevails, so shall the line of the stewards. Faramir then takes back his position as steward and announces Aragorn's name and claim to the throne. Then he asks the people of Gondor if they accept this claim, and there is a resounding yay. Then Faramir presents the crown to Aragorn, but Aragorn requests that Frodo be the one to present it and Gandalf be the one to set it on his head. And this is what Aragorn says in the book. "By the labor and valor of many, I have come into my inheritance. In token of this, I would have the ring-bearer bring the crown to me, and let Mithrandir set it upon my head, if he will. For he has been the mover of all that has been accomplished, and this is his victory." And then upon his crowning, Faramir shouted, "Behold the king!" And as trumpets sounded and people rejoiced, Aragorn walked into the city for the first time as king, and his long reign began. After this, Tolkien writes about different deeds by Aragorn, like his freeing of the Easterlings to go back in peace to their land. He made peace with the people of Harad, and he gave a decent amount of land to the slaves of Mordor for them to live in and be free. We also learn about Baragon's judgment for his treason, as Aragorn tells him that usually they would kill someone in his position, but because of his loyalty to the Lord Faramir, he is appointed as captain of the White Guard, which will work under Faramir's command in Ithilien. Lastly, Aragorn met with Éomer and greeted him as a brother, stating that there will be no giving or taking between them as they are equals. Éomer then tells Aragorn that he must go back to his land to set things in order, and Aragorn says that they will keep Theoden's body safe in the White City until Éomer is ready to return for it. So, almost a week after Aragorn's coronation, Éowyn and Éomer set out to their homeland to get things in order before returning for Theoden. The chapter then continues to discuss the following weeks and months, and we read that Aragorn was reluctant to dissolve the Fellowship, requesting that Legolas, Gimli, and the hobbits remain in the city until a day soon to come when he would want them by his side. But Aragorn would not reveal to them what that day was. And before this day comes, there's yet another key detail which the movie never addresses, and that is Aragorn's replanting of the White Tree of Gondor. Remember it had died? Well, Gandalf takes Aragorn up on top of Mindalluin one day and pulls a Mufasa moment of "everything you see is your kingdom." But Aragorn mentions that he will eventually die, and as the White Tree is still barren, there is no hope that Aragorn will have offspring of his own to continue his line. Gandalf then tells him to turn around, and as Aragorn does, he sees a sapling in the ground. Gandalf explains that this sapling is a descendant of the White Tree, and Aragorn gently removes it from the earth and carries it back to the city to be planted as the new White Tree. Then in June, we read that the new tree blossomed, and at this, Aragorn stated that the sign has been given and the day is not far off, and he set watchmen on the walls. Then finally, to end off chapter 5, we read that not long after the tree blossomed, a group could be seen coming toward the city, and as they got closer, we learned that they are Elrohir and Elladan, Glorfindel and Erestor, Galadriel and Celeborn, and lastly, Elrond and Arwen. And Frodo turned to Gandalf and said, "At last I understand why we have waited. This is the ending." And Aragorn and Arwen wedded in the city, and finally, their long labor of love was fulfilled. And now we come to our third and final chapter of today's analysis, which is chapter 6 and is titled Many Partings. This chapter is another incredible piece of literature in which Tolkien wraps up many plot lines and loose ends regarding each character as they dissolve the Fellowship. This is a chapter that has zero corresponding scenes in the movie, and if you have only watched the movies, then you would know nothing of the Fellowship's final journey. So to end today's video, I'm going to break down what happens in this chapter and how each character's individual story was concluded. Picking up with where the last chapter left off, the Fellowship spent more time with Aragorn in the city, but eventually Frodo desired to leave. Not because he wanted to leave Aragorn, but because he couldn't stop thinking about Bilbo. Knowing that Bilbo might not have many days left, Frodo felt he had to leave soon to go see his dearest relative before the end. So we read that Frodo went to Aragorn and Arwen, and they graciously told him that he is free to do whatever he wants, but as long as Aragorn reigns as king, Frodo will be regarded as a prince and a hero of the land. Then we read something super interesting, which is that Arwen gifts Frodo her necklace, which held a bright star-like gem in its setting. She then tells Frodo that she will no longer be going with her father to the Undying Lands, and therefore Frodo may go in her place. Now this is interesting for two reasons. First, this necklace seems to be where Peter Jackson got the inspiration for the necklace she gives Aragorn in the movie. Second, this explains, at least in a symbolic way, the reason why Frodo is allowed to go to the Undying Lands at the end of the story. He's essentially taking the place of a legitimate elf. But that's getting a little ahead of ourselves. Anyway, Aragorn tells Frodo that he may go, and in a few days' time, Éomer will be returning for Theoden's body. Then Aragorn, Arwen, and the rest of the Fellowship will travel with Éomer back to Edoras to lay Theoden to rest. So Frodo waits a little longer and then departs with the company as they take Theoden back to his homeland. A funny little aside here is that before they leave, they have a feast and Éomer talks with Gimli about who is the most beautiful lady in all of Middle-earth. He asks Gimli if he has his axe ready, and Gimli says that he can get his axe if he needs it. Then Éomer reveals that he does not think the Lady Galadriel is the fairest, to which Gimli says that he will go fetch his axe. But Éomer quickly follows this up by saying that he thinks the Lady Arwen is the fairest. And to that, Gimli laughs, saying that that is acceptable, and Éomer has chosen the evening, but Gimli still chooses the morning beauty of Galadriel. Anyway, moving on to the journey to Rivendell, which is where Bilbo is, there are several stops along the way, including Edoras, where Theoden must be buried. Before reaching Edoras, however, as they entered the forest of the Druiden, Aragorn had the trumpeters let out a blast and then announced to the woods that the king now gives this forest to Gon-Burigan and his people forever. If you remember, it is thanks to the assistance of Gon-Burigan and the Druidine people that the Rohirrim arrived on the Pelennor in time to save the day. It is after this announcement that we then pick up with them arriving at Edoras and having the funeral for Theoden, burying him in one of the mounds meant for the kings. And during the song they sang for the great king, Merry stood at the foot of the mound and wept, saying that Theoden was like a father to him. Then the whole company had a feast in which they celebrated Éomer as the new king of Rohan, and Éomer gave his blessing to Faramir to take Éowyn as his wife. Finally, after some time, the people of Rivendell and Lorien made ready to leave, and so the fellowship went along as well. Only Faramir, Imrahil, and Arwen stayed back in Edoras, and Arwen and Elrond shared a long, meaningful goodbye that no one else saw. After all, it would be the last time that they would ever see each other. The next stage of their journey took them to Helm's Deep, where they stayed for 2 days. Gimli finally got to show Legolas the glittering caves, and after returning from them, Legolas was speechless, which is rare because, as Legolas says, an elf never loses a battle of words against a dwarf. But after this rest, the company continued on to Isengard, and Gandalf checked on Treebeard. The Ent informed them that he let Saruman go as he had become a shell of his previous self and lacked power now. Gandalf then told Treebeard he thinks Saruman tricked him and that even without power, Saruman is capable of mean deeds, which as we know, we will encounter by the end. But eventually, after Merry and Pippin had one last drink of Entdraft with Treebeard, the company decided to continue. However, 2 members needed to stay behind, and that would be Legolas and Gimli. After all, Legolas had agreed to travel into the Glittering Caves with Gimli if he would go with him to Fangorn. And so, very reluctantly, Aragorn dissolved the fellowship and Legolas and Gimli parted ways to go to Fangorn and then back to their own people. After this, the remaining members of the company journeyed onward until they reached the Gap of Rohan, where Aragorn said his farewell. Pippin remarked how he wished they could have all had a Seeing Stone so they could all speak with each other from far away, and Aragorn told him that only one such stone remained, and it was in possession of the king alone. He then reminded Pippin that he is still a knight of Gondor, and Aragorn may call on him in the future to fulfill his duties. Then Aragorn said goodbye to Celeborn and Galadriel and took his leave. And now we come to another interesting and foreshadowing moment in the company's journey, and that is their run-in with Saruman. 6 days after parting with Aragorn, the company came to the foot of the Misty Mountains and ran into Wormtongue and his master Saruman, and Gandalf offered them help, but of course Saruman refused. They spoke for a while, and in typical Saruman fashion, he had nothing but negative things to say, hitting Wormtongue and forcing him to come along with him. There is one line of dialogue here that really foreshadows the future of the Shire, and that is Saruman telling the hobbits, "It will serve you right when you come home if you find things less good in the South Farthing than you would like. Long may your land be short of leaf." Obviously, we know that the scouring of the Shire is soon to come, and Saruman might have gotten the idea to head to their homeland after this encounter. Regardless, the company eventually continued on, and as they came close to the gates of Moria, they stopped and camped out for 7 days. For this is where they would have to have one of the toughest goodbyes, which would be the parting of Celeborn and Galadriel. We read that the hobbits slept under the stars and often talked and held counsel together about what had happened or what was to come. But eventually, after the 7 days, Galadriel and Celeborn took their leave along with their people and went back to Lorien, and the rest of the company went forward until reaching Rivendell, where Frodo reunited with Bilbo. They then stayed in Rivendell for some time and visited with Bilbo, who gave each of the 4 hobbits a gift. To Frodo, he gave his mithril shirt and sting, as he had forgot that he had already given them to him. To Sam, he gave the last bit of gold that he had from the adventure with Smaug. And to Merry and Pippin, he gave each of them a pipe made by the elf specifically for Bilbo. And then finally, after this long journey and visiting with Bilbo, Frodo and the others made ready to depart and head home. And that wraps up the last of the 3 chapters for today's video. So now that you've heard it all and you know what Peter Jackson and his writers had to work with and condense for the film, Would you have done it any differently? Remember how I said that they essentially took these 3 chapters and fit them into 5 words? Well, I believe that more than just tying up loose ends in the plot, Tolkien was trying to communicate a feeling. The emotion you get when you're saying goodbye to an old friend. The feeling you have when you are immensely grateful and want to honor someone who has played a massive role in your life. And for this specific story, Tolkien is trying to communicate the impact that Frodo and Sam had on Middle-earth as a whole, and the connection and bond that the Fellowship had made with each other. So for me, this scene in the movie is as perfect as you can get within the allotted time frame you have for a film. Seeing Aragorn, who has just been crowned as the most powerful person in Middle-earth, get on his knee and bow to the 4 hobbits, the seemingly least powerful people, is one of the most impactful images in the entire trilogy. And it exemplifies the message Tolkien was trying to send in his epic tale, that the littlest person can have the largest effect. You Bow to No One will continue to give me goosebumps every time I watch it, because it is the perfect way to honor these heroes and sum up the adventure as a whole. But now that's enough of me, and I want to hear from you. Comment your thoughts below and get excited for next week as we'll be covering a fan favorite, The Scouring of the Shire. As always, be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and check out the series playlist to catch up on any episodes you might have missed so far. Also, shout out to these amazing Patreon supporters, and don't forget to join the Patreon yourself if you want to support the channel and these videos, and get early access to every video I make. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next episode.